I'm in Paris, and it's 6 o'clock in the evening here. I want to be able to see everybody on. I got to change my view. I want the gallery. I want the gallery view. Yeah. So at any rate, I'm here in Paris, and a huge thunderstorm has just started. So you guys might hear thunder and lightning. I came this close to stopping our dear Bayan and saying, don't read all that nonsense. If they feel like looking me up, they can look me up. I'm just here to give a little talk about some reflections I have on the Baha'i teachings. And that is really the greatest honor of my life when I get to do that, because there is so much beauty and wisdom and so much peace I get from the Baha'i writings. So first and foremost, happy Juneteenth, everybody. I encourage all of you to, as soon as this is over, and maybe before it's over, if you're finding it a drag, go to Juneteenth celebrations in your area. Find out where people are celebrating and get on over there and have a nice Juneteenth celebration. So the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect on January 1st, 1863. Juneteenth happened June 19th, 1865 in Galveston, Texas, with General Order Number 3, which was telling the last group of slaves. You know, Texas was kind of far away from all the hubbub, and they were sort of the last holdout. And because I'm a highly imperfect person, and I'm going to start my talk by basically being a bad example of what I'm trying to encourage you all to do, that the Baha'i writings encourages me to do. And I'm going to posit something that's slightly cynical. It feels a little weird to me that Texas was the first state that made Juneteenth an official holiday, and now it's a national holiday. So we all will celebrate Juneteenth. And it makes me wonder, what exactly were they celebrating? Were the white legislators who authorized the holiday celebrating the freedom of enslaved peoples, or the fact that they got 2.5 extra years of enslaving people? Because Juneteenth is a celebration of, the freedom of peoples after that had already been established 2.5 years before. So that's my little cynicism for the day. I'll try to behave myself moving forward, because the topic that I put forward was the idea of radical virtue. And radical virtue to me means what I see in the Baha'i writings. What the Baha'i writings call us to is to essentially, as I see it, up our spiritual game. And what really needs to happen for racism is an upping of our spiritual game to the level that has not been seen. And I think certainly hasn't been seen in me. And we all have our own personal path of what it is in our character, what it is to gain virtues, what virtues we need to gain. And for me, I need to be a little less cynical. I need to be a little less snarky. But sometimes when I read about the history of the country that I was not taught properly, I get really snarky and negative. But I know that that's not the most effective way to deal with this problem. I know it's not going to cause unity. So I'll stop now. But it does feel like a real question. What exactly were they celebrating? And the Baha'i Faith has no clergy, so you're kind of stuck with me today. But I'm nobody. I'm just a human being that has been reading the Baha'i writings. And I think this is something about the Baha'i Faith that is very hard even for the Baha'is to understand what community means where there's no clergy, where nobody has more of a right to tell you how to interpret the Baha'i writings than anybody else. And so we have all these study classes with like facilitators, but even those facilitators, they don't have the answers. And so we're all in this process. So what I want to offer to you as an idea going forward is that we are talking about something that is radical and revolutionary. We're not talking about let's be a little nicer and everything's going to be okay. And it's, we had a little back and forth, I and the hosts of this event, because I put a sort of long-winded version of what I wanted the talk to be called, and it had the word radical in it, and then they wrote back and said, what about something that's a little more concise? And they were right, but they took the word radical out, and I said, oh, no, do not take the word radical out. And then I said, yeah, we do need something smaller, so I put radical, and then they sent it back to me, and it also didn't have the word radical. It was just a typo. But to me, it was an interesting typo because I think as a rule, we're looking for change, but we're not looking for change that's really going to mess with the status quo. And it's really hard for us to realize what a tendency we have in the culture that I come from, which is nice Midwestern white Milwaukee people. And I see one of my oldest friends here, so she knows exactly what I'm talking about. Oh yeah, Dinah, we're just the nicest people in the world. But frankly, we're not so nice. Not when you really look at what the virtues are that the Baha'i writings command us to, when we look at the truth of the matter. Okay, so the first writing that I want to share with you, which I think is kind of the first little deal. Truthfulness is the foundation of all the virtues of the world of humanity. Without truthfulness, progress and success in all the worlds of God are impossible for a soul. When this holy attribute is established in man, all the divine qualities will also become realized. Well, that's pretty heavy. So if there isn't truthfulness, if there isn't honesty, nothing else goes. It's like number uno. And I would add to that there's other things in the Baha'i writings about the independent investigation of truth. That not only is truthfulness the virtue that we have to start with, we also have to start even before that with an independence and understanding that the Baha'i writings are very harsh about blindly following what anybody else says, that we are individuals and we're supposed to be mature in we're supposed to be having the coming of age of human beings, of being independent of clergy and understanding with our own mind. And the second writing that I'll share is sort of related to that. O Son of Spirit, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom, if thou desirest me, and neglect it not, that I may confide in thee. By its aid thou shalt see with thine own eyes, and not through the eyes of others, and shalt know of thine own knowledge, and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor. Ponder this in thy heart, how it behooveth thee to be. Verily, justice is my gift to thee, and the sign of my loving kindness. Set it then before thine eyes. All right, so I just wrote down a couple of things that I want you to think about in terms of those two writings. And I think a lot of things are things that have been talked about a lot in this last little period. The Tulsa Massacre of June 1921, the Red Summer of Chicago, Bloody Summer of 1919, redlining, the history of exclusion of Black people from neighborhoods and getting loans, the continuing undervaluing of homes because people of color go to supposedly independent and unbiased sources to get their homes assessed, and they find that they're $100,000 less than when I go and say it's my house. Incarceration statistics. Do a little research on how often people get arrested for drug crimes and how long those sentences are, and et cetera. The invention of the concept of race for the purposes of money and power. And there's a podcast that I recommend that all of you listen to if you haven't. It's called, it's something that you can find called Scene on Radio, SCENE, and I'll write it in the chat. Scene on Radio. And it's like season 2 or season 3, and it's called Seeing White. the Seeing White podcast. And the idea is that we don't even ask the question of what is white. And there's even very interesting things for those of you from who are Persian or from India or from other parts of the world about the laws of people having trials to be declared as white, as this stuff. I mean, this is really fascinating stuff that we were never taught in school. So I think of myself, and in terms of those writings of Baha'u'llah, saying truthfulness is the foundation of all virtues, and without truthfulness, no other virtue can take hold. And I feel like I grew up in a country where essential truthfulness was not present to a large degree. And we are now having a kind of come to Baha'u'llah moment, come to Jesus moment. You know, we're having a kind of, I think, en masse white America who are sincere are saying, oh, wow. And I also think of the pandemic and George Floyd as almost as if God took our faces and put them towards the TV to watch the image of the murder of George Floyd and just said, no, you are not allowed to look away. You're not allowed to go to work. You're not allowed to go to the store. You're not allowed to go to concerts. You're not allowed to distract yourself in any way. You must look at this because we don't want to look at it. It's very unpleasant. And I would submit it's the reason that it's unpleasant is, of course, we're human beings and we are experiencing our oneness. We're experiencing the horror of our lack of understanding of our oneness. We're experiencing the horror of our lack of sensitivity and lack of compassion and all the rest of it. But I also submit that one of the reasons we don't want to look at this stuff is that when we look at it, it demands a radical, very inconvenient change in our lives in a fundamental way. And what we've always sort of thought was, and I think I thought this for a long time, that if we individually try to be nice and we individually teach our children not to be racist and we individually are kind, that everything's going to be okay. And I would submit that my understanding of the Baha'i writings is that that is not the case, that we're called to a higher level of virtue, which I defined as radical virtue. Okay, so there's all these things that we're starting to, things like, you know, spending time reading about. I was just hearing in the Seeing White podcast about the Mankato Indian massacre of it was right at the same time as the Civil War, so like 1862, 63. And this is just heartbreaking. And it made me more of a fan of Abraham Lincoln than ever. He was so trying to subdue the bloodlust of the white citizens of Mankato after there was basically a war that was caused by the treachery of the Americans lying and cheating the Native Americans out of treaties and stuff. And anyway, long story short, Abraham Lincoln, just off of Antietam, was sent a cable or whatever they did in those days saying, okay, we've got 350 or 400 Indian braves and we want to hang them all. We want to hang them all. And he wrote back and he said, please wait. You know, he said, please don't do this. You must look at each case. And if they were rapists, well, then you can kill them, but you can't just kill them for being soldiers. And then they wrote back and they said, well, we've only found that 4 of them. Of course, they said initially that they were all rapists. They said, no, we've only been able to prove that 3 or 4 of them were rapists. And then the governors of the town said to Lincoln, these people are not going to be satisfied with us killing 4 people. They're just not, you know. I mean, and in it's not their defense because of the whole story, but I think almost 1,000 of the white settlers had been killed in these things. So, but Abraham Lincoln was so trying to find a moderate response, and so finally he said, okay, If they've looted houses, if they've looted houses, then they can be hanged. And so in the end, they were able to sort of prove cases against, I think, 38 men, and they hung them. They hung 38 men in this thing. But all of these things that we don't hear about, and we hear about, Freedom Summer and things in Mississippi and things in Alabama, but we don't hear about things in Minnesota, in Milwaukee, where I grew up, in North Dakota, South Dakota, all throughout our country. The country is full of these kind of stories, and I define these stories. I've come to call them sinus clearing facts. That's what I call them. It's like you hear something and you go, whoa, like I knew it was bad, but I didn't know it was that bad. I mean, I thought it was bad, but I didn't know it was like I can't sleep at night bad. And so, all right, so I think that looking at the actual history has resulted in this sort of drumbeat in a lot of our minds of, whoa, this is so much more brutal, unjust, and messed up than I actually thought. And so much more structurally baked in the cake. This wasn't based on one or two or even 20, hooded Klansmen doing these things. This was systems that were carefully crafted in the making of our nation and its institutions. And it's, I think, really important for us to know those things. So the Seeing White podcast is a great one to, just listen to it on your walk and whatever. All right, so there's this wonderful passage of Shoghi Effendi. Now, keep in mind that Shoghi Effendi, who was the great-grandson of the founder of our faith, Baha'u'llah, and he was the guardian of our faith and interpreted the Baha'i writings for us, and was Oxford educated, and so he spoke English more beautifully than anyone ever, pretty much, and translated a lot of the writings. And he was a student of history. He was a great student of history, and so his interpretations and his way of looking at things were kind of freakily on the money. And he never visited the United States, but he wrote about the United States a lot because he knew that the United States was going to be a very powerful nation in the development of the world. And he said many nice things. He said, we were intelligent and we had great initiative and all the rest of it. But we had some serious problems that we had to overcome in order to be spiritual leaders in the world, in order to fulfill our destiny. And he goes on to say, and he talks about, he says, to contend that the innate worthiness, the high moral standard, the political aptitude, the social attainments of any race or nation is the reason for the appearance in its midst of any of these divine luminaries, Jesus, Muhammad, would be an absolute perversion of historical facts. All right, so what he's talking about there is that he was talking about how Iran was the most corrupt, backward place on earth, and that's why Baha'u'llah came to Iran at the time that he came. He came there to come to the people that were in the biggest trouble, were the biggest mess, to show that God picks the people that needs it the most, and also shows the transformational capacity of the messenger of God by going to that particular place where it's real bad. You follow? Now, what he says is that the United States is the cradle of the administrative order of the Baha'i Faith. So we got the kind of, I don't know, cookie, or the blessing, if you will, of being the cradle of the administration that would build the structures that would build the Baha'i Faith around the world, because it's a whole order of councils and consultation and rules of problem solving and all of this stuff. And this passage that he just wrote, he said, don't think that the reason America is the cradle of the administrative order is because America's all that. And so when he says And he was using the example of the divine messengers coming to the places where they're needed the most. And he says it's the same with us in the United States. And so thinking of an absolute perversion of historical facts brings me to that idea that we have this idea of, America, the home of the free, and the home of the brave, the land of the free and the home of the brave. I mean, when you really look at the history of Native Americans, of course, slavery, chattel slavery, which is so specific to the United States, and so patently evil, to use the words of The Guardian, in such a specific way, the hypocrisy, between what the idea of our nation is and what the reality was, is kind of, it's like a sinus clearing fact for me. It's like, whoa, and then for me, it makes me understand the frustration and anger on the part of so many people who have been immersed in this injustice and have known it much longer than I have. So Shoghi Effendi goes on and he says, it is precisely by reason of the patent evils which, notwithstanding its other admittedly great characteristics and achievements, an excessive and binding materialism has unfortunately engendered within it, that the author of their faith and the center of his covenant have singled it out to become the standard bearer of the new world order envisioned in their writings. It is by such means as this that Baha'u'llah can best demonstrate to a heedless generation his almighty power to raise up from the very midst of a people immersed in a sea of materialism and prey to one of the most virulent and long-standing forms of racial prejudice, and notorious for its political corruption, lawlessness, and laxity in moral standards. Men and women who, as time goes by, will increasingly exemplify those essential virtues of self-renunciation, of moral rectitude, of chastity, of indiscriminating fellowship, of holy discipline, and of spiritual insight that will fit them for the preponderating share they will have in calling into being that world order and that world civilization of which their country, no less than the entire human race, stands in desperate need. So welcome to the writings of Shoghi Effendi, if you haven't heard them before. They're really, really dense, but they're so wonderful. He says exactly what he wants to say. He uses exactly the words that he wants to use. And I actually, in honor of Shoghi Effendi, looked up the meaning of the word radical, because I thought, I do understand that it is my tendency to be a little bit too much of a bomb thrower. I have to calm down and not be so intense. I have to understand that, some people are much more pure-hearted than I am, and the world doesn't need any more snark from me. And so maybe radical is the wrong word. But, I looked it up, and it's exactly the right word that I want to use. And so the meanings that I got for radical are, let's see. Do I not have it? So I've got two things. I've got the, did I? Okay, here we go. So the first meaning of the word radical is, especially in terms of change or action, okay? Relating to or affecting the fundamental nature of something, far-reaching or thorough. That's one. And number two, of surgery or medical treatment. Thorough and intended to be completely curative. All right, so I think that there is a, what kept coming to me as I was sort of looking at different writings and thinking about the issues that we're dealing with right now, I kept thinking the intense injustice and brutality that I've been sort of immersing myself into learning about demands a pretty intense response. I mean, that's what I kept feeling. I kept feeling like when you sort of, it's like a pendulum thing. So, I mean, but I can't lose my mind, you know, but that obviously there's something really, there's got to be some response that feels like it's of a quality that will be radical enough for what we've been through, the trauma that this nation and this world has gone through and continues to go through. So I'm going to read something of The Guardian again. This is from a letter. This is from The World Order of Baha'u'llah by Shoghi Effendi. Prepare yourself. Gird your loins, as we say sometimes. Let there be no mistake. The principle of the oneness of mankind, the pivot round which all the teachings of Baha'u'llah revolve, is no mere outburst of ignorant emotionalism or an expression of vague and pious hope. Its appeal is not to be merely identified with a reawakening of the spirit of brotherhood and goodwill among men, nor does it aim solely at the fostering of harmonious cooperation among individual peoples and nations. Its implications are deeper, its claims greater than any which the prophets of old were allowed to advance. Its message is applicable not only to the individual, but concerns itself primarily with the nature of those essential relationships that must bind all states and nations as members of one human family. It implies an organic change in the structure of present-day society, a change such as the world has not yet experienced. It constitutes a challenge at once bold and universal to outworn shibboleths. Oh yeah, I had to look that one up. Outworn shibboleths of national creeds. And it's the perfect word. It's exactly what he means. A shibboleth is like a tradition or a way of doing things that is outworn. It's, Shoghi Effendi, so it's the perfect word. To outworn shibboleths of national creeds, creeds that have had their day and must, in the ordinary course of events, as shaped and controlled by providence, give way to a new gospel, fundamentally different from and infinitely superior to what the world has already conceived. It calls for no less than the reconstruction and demilitarization of the whole civilized world. If that is not radical, I don't know what is. We're not, what Shoghi Effendi talks about here is not, we're gonna be nice. We're gonna be nice, yes, he talks about he has mystical works, of course, where he talks about, the oneness of mankind in the mystical sense, and that we must, meditate and pray and be connected as one human family. And there are so many beautiful Baha'i writings. And I suspect that this space spends a lot of time, wonderfully so, sharing those writings with you. At the same time, make no mistake, as Shoghi Effendi says, the coming of Baha'u'llah is on earth as it is in heaven. That's what the Baha'i Faith is about. It's about building the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. When I talk to beautiful, wonderful Christian friends who love Jesus and more than anything in the world, I remember talking to some of my wonderful, beautiful Christian friends about what their churches might think of some of the injustices happening in the world. And one of my friends said to me, just in no uncertain terms, it's not our job to do anything about that. We're supposed to teach people about Jesus Christ, and this world is supposed to do what it's going to do. Our job is to build the kingdom of Jesus and to bind souls, to, and I understand that. That's one way of looking at it, but that's not the Baha'i way of looking at it. The Baha'i way of looking at it is the time has come. Mankind is one. We kind of know it. We're living with the reality of it, with pandemics and all the rest of it. And we need to be conscious of this and gain the essential virtues to be citizens of this new kind of spiritual reality. All right, so so then that quote goes on and it says, this idea of the oneness of humankind, which is not just sitting around and singing Kumbaya, it's like a real intense, reworking of everything, says it represents the consummation of human evolution. Represents the consummation of human evolution. An evolution that has had its earliest beginnings in the birth of family life, its subsequent development in the achievement of tribal solidarity, leading in turn to the constitution of the city-state and expanding later into the institution of independent and sovereign nations. But this last paragraph is kind of the reason I ended up becoming a Baha'i 40 years ago. The principle of the oneness of mankind, as proclaimed by Baha'u'llah, carries with it no more and no less than a solemn assertion that attainment to this final stage in this stupendous evolution is not only necessary but inevitable, that its realization is fast approaching, and that nothing short of a power that is born of God can succeed in establishing it. So we will achieve some kind of unity. It's inevitable. Its realization is fast approaching, but nothing short of a power that is born of God can succeed in establishing it. And how I interpret that, because the Baha'i writings, Abdul Baha was once described as walking the spiritual path on practical feet. And I think of this idea of, I'll take this moment to point out that Baha'is do not participate in, I shouldn't say participate, but it's sort of participate. Baha'is do not take sides in partisan politics. I'm not going to sit here and talk to you about whether Democrats or Republicans have it more right. Shoghi Effendi, it's really interesting in that thing. He talks about materialism. He says materialism twice in that little passage, and he's gearing up to get really intense about how Americans need to deal with racism, and they need to deal with it really frankly. But in his premise to talking about racism, he talks about materialism twice. He doesn't talk about a specific form of government because he's Shoghi Effendi and he's so smart. And he has really, really negative things to say about politics in general. He has negative things to say about communism. He has negative things to say about capitalism. It's not about that. We are outside of those systems. We don't believe that a little tweak to the capitalist system is what we need. I mean, you think of those writings I read and the idea of things being truly radical. There's a political theorist that many of you may have read or heard of named Howard Zinn. I think he passed away a couple of years ago. And he wrote a book called A People's History of the United States that has a lot of this kind of sinus clearing stuff in it. And he's a kind of lefty, political theorist. And I took his class in college. And I told him that you talking about civil disobedience presumes that the systems that we have in place are basically okay. And if we tweak them and get a different elected guy in there, it's going to be okay. I said, as a Baha'i, I don't believe that. I think it's much deeper than that. I think we're too far gone. And then when you think of the idea of radical virtue, which is, we'll get to that. So, all right. So that's that. Here's another one that a friend of mine sent me. This is from the Universal House of Justice, which I just love. Okay. As you know from your study of the Baha'i writings, I'm just going to assume you all do, you all know, the principle that is to infuse all facets of organized life on the planet is the oneness of humankind, the hallmark of the age of maturity. That humanity constitutes a single people is a truth that, once viewed with skepticism, claims widespread acceptance today. The rejection of deeply ingrained prejudices and a growing sense of world citizenship are among the signs of this heightened awareness. Yet, however promising the rise in collective consciousness may be, it should be seen as only the first step of a process that will take decades, nay centuries, to unfold. For the principle of the oneness of humankind, as proclaimed by Baha'u'llah, asks not merely for cooperation among people and nations. It calls for a complete reconceptualization of the relationships that sustain society. A complete reconceptualization of the relationships that sustain society. The deepening environmental crisis, driven by a system that condones the pillage of natural resources to satisfy an insatiable thirst for more, suggests how entirely inadequate is the present conception of humanity's relationship with nature. The deterioration of the human environment, with the accompanying rise in the systematic exploitation of women and children worldwide, makes clear how pervasive are the misbegotten notions that define relations within the family unit. The persistence of despotism, on the one hand, and the increasing disregard for authority, on the other, reveal how unsatisfactory to a maturing humanity is the current relationship between the individual and the institutions of society. The concentration of material wealth in the hands of minority of the world's population gives an indication of how fundamentally ill-conceived are relationships among the many sectors of what is now an emerging global community. The principle of the oneness of humanity implies, then, an organic change in the very structure of society. Organic change in the very structure of society. Let's return to our regularly scheduled radicalism. We are radical. If you read the Baha'i writings, you are radical. If you decide to live by them, you're even more radical. It's just really, really radical stuff. It's not a little tweak here and there. Will be nice. I'm going to make some friends of different races. I'm going to eat some ethnic food and it's going to be nice. No. Organic change. All right, so now we get to, so I'll just go another 9 minutes and then we can have the last half hour to discuss with you guys. Is that okay? Can I get a head nod or a stop? And all right. And I will make sure that all of these writings are available to you. I'll get a PDF of them and maybe these guys can attach it to the talk so that when people, they have the technology, they know how to do that. All right. So we know that the Baha'i writings are asking us to have a reconceptualization, to engage in organic change. And of course, that last little passage had all sorts of little nuggets in it, talking about Baha'i principles, the equality of men and women, the problem of extremes of wealth and poverty in our society, and the need for economic justice, and all these things. So as we talk about these things, a lot of the basics of the Baha'i faith, if you don't know them, are kind of connected to what I'm talking about. But let's get to Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth. Baha'u'llah once compared the colored people to the black pupil of the eye, surrounded by the white. In this black pupil is seen the reflection of that which is before it, and through it the light of the Spirit shineth forth. I'm going to read that again. Baha'u'llah once compared the colored people to the black pupil of the eye, surrounded by the white. In this black pupil is seen the reflection of that which is before it, and through it the light of the Spirit shineth forth. There's a group that I have the great pleasure and honor of being a facilitator in on Sunday afternoons or Sunday mornings in LA. That is basically the LA race discussion, and it was founded by some Baha'is, mostly Baha'is of color, who wanted to have a really, really honest conversation about what, frankly, the white Baha'is were not absorbing in the Baha'i writings, that our perspective was having some issues. And because of those issues, we needed to clean up our perception. We needed to listen and figure stuff out. And we needed to do this because the writings are clear that the unity of white and black in America will be an assurance of the world's peace. And without truthfulness and without knowing our stuff and without understanding that Baha'u'llah himself gave this distinction to people of color, which I'm sure is no accident. And it's the only people he talked about that way. I'm sure he was wise enough to know that there would be a prevailing sentiment, as we have known and studied, of anti-blackness throughout the world. And it happens in India, it happens in Iran, it happens in Korea, it happens obviously in the United States. And so not only do the Baha'i writings not speak disparagingly of people of color, they encourage white people to understand that without the pupil of the eye, we can't see. And in order to create equilibrium in the world, we're going to need to center that pupil of the eye and make sure that we get that perspective to find balance in our communities, and especially in the United States. All right, so essentially, when he talks about racism in America, the way that I hear these writings is he says, you guys have to up your spiritual game. I mean, I'm saying it in my goofy little dopey white girl from Milwaukee way, but up your spiritual game. We have to up our spiritual game. And that's what I mean by radical virtue. So he also does something that happens nowhere else in the Baha'i writings. And that is he gives a different job to white people than he does to black people. Nowhere else in the Baha'i writings does this happen. In every other place, it's like, oh, yes, we're all one and you do this and we all do this as human beings because we're one human family and we're 100%. In terms of being American and overcoming the trauma that our particular country participated in, we needed something specific. And this is actually one of the reasons that I became attracted to the Baha'i faith, because to me, it was so clear that this was a spiritual crisis in America. And the fact that the major religions that surrounded me not only didn't talk about it, but were in total denial about its existence, I found to be totally bizarre. And it made me not a believer in God. I thought, if there was a God and he saw what was going on in the United States, he would obviously have something to say about it. And of course, Shoghi Effendi was not God, but he was the interpreter of the Baha'i writings, and he was the head of the faith, and he was the last central figure of our faith. Now we just have elected councils. All right, so this is what he says to white people in 1938. And the first letters that he wrote about this were 1928. So imagine he's writing this in the shadow of the Tulsa race riots and all of these things that we're learning about now. And he says, let the white make a supreme effort in their resolve to contribute their share to the solution of this problem, to abandon once and for all their usually inherent and at times subconscious sense of superiority, to correct their tendency towards revealing a patronizing attitude toward the members of the other race, to persuade them through their intimate, spontaneous, and informal association with them of the genuineness of their friendship and the sincerity of their intentions, and to master their impatience of any lack of responsiveness on the part of the people who have received for so long a period such grievous and slow healing wounds. It's really hard for me to read that without bursting into tears. Because to imagine that this man who was living in Israel, who had never visited the United States, could speak to American people with this level of comprehension of not only what we needed to do, but how we were going to try to worm our way out of it. And he doesn't let us. It just kills me every time. He says, let the white make a supreme effort in their resolve to contribute their share to the solution of this problem. Okay, then he just calls it just right out, to abandon once and for all their usually inherent and at times subconscious sense of superiority. You're going to have this. You are going to have this. It might be subconscious, but it's usually inherent. And then he knows what we're going to do on top of that. He says, to correct their tendency towards revealing a patronizing attitude towards members of the other race. Is that us or what? Come on. Come on, guys. That's us. I grew up in Milwaukee. That's my people, man. He just knew exactly psychologically what games we were going to play. And to persuade them through their intimate, spontaneous, and informal association with them of the genuineness of their friendship and the sincerity of their intentions. And then he says, I love this, and to master their impatience, our impatience. We're supposed to master our impatience of any lack of responsiveness on the part of a people who have received for so long a period such grievous and slow healing wounds. Here's someone that knew that we were going to, make our little efforts and just expect everything to be hunky-dory as soon as we made our little efforts. Nope. He doesn't even let us have that. He doesn't say, make your effort and then you can sleep at night and everything's good. No. You make your effort. You don't expect a response. You understand what the history is. You understand you're going to have a tendency to be patronizing. You understand you have a usually inherent sense of superiority, which now the science is just backing up like mad. That just scientifically, psychologically, this is what's been happening. But then he gives the Black people their job, which I won't even bother to read, but it's interesting because he says through a corresponding effort on their part. And it's basically, try not to be suspicious. Try to give a little encouragement when the white people do all the things that they need to do. But it doesn't, it basically doesn't tell them they're doing anything wrong. They just have to try to overcome suspicion, which obviously from the stuff that's written to us is justified. We're told to understand that they're probably going to be suspicious. They're probably going to be suspicious for a long time. But this is the part that really was the impetus for the idea of radical virtue. And this I really hope I can get in the chat. It says, let neither think anything short of genuine love, extreme patience, true humility, consummate tact, sound initiative, mature wisdom, and deliberate, persistent, and prayerful effort can succeed in blotting out the stain which this patent evil has left on the fair name of their common country. I'm going to really try to put that in the chat. And if it doesn't work, I'll just write it in the chat. It worked. So to me, thinking of these virtues, this is radical virtue. Thinking of waking up in the morning and saying, okay, nothing short of genuine love. What does genuine love mean? Whoa. Is genuine love being okay with the incarceration statistics once you know about them? It's not very genuinely loving to let any of this injustice go on. Genuine love, extreme patience, extreme patience. What's extreme patience? True humility. And that's a hard one for us folks because we think we know it all. True humility, consummate tact. I have some problems with that. I'm working my program. Okay, consummate tact, sound initiative. Yeah, okay. Mature wisdom and deliberate, persistent, and prayerful effort can succeed in blotting out the stain which this patent evil has left on the fair name of their common country. And I would just add to that, and then I want you guys to jump in and share with me that, this idea of figuring out a way to connect. One of the other writings that I had was, the hidden word that says, noble have I created thee. O son of spirit, noble have I created ye, yet thou hast abased thyself. Rise then for that which thou wast created. So this idea that it's also a radical virtue to see the good in people, all people. I mean, all people. And the Baha'i writings are really, really clear about this. Don't see anybody as your enemy. So this whole paradigm that we have right now of people going for each other's jugular veins and trying to find their one little thing that they said in 1985 that proves that they're a racist and we don't have to talk to them anymore. That's nonsense. And radical virtue does not tolerate that. Radical virtue is extreme patience. It's not lying about stuff and it's not tolerating incredible amounts of injustice, but it's finding this delicate balance that is us cleaning up our own characters and being a new kind of people that have a different way of communicating and a different way of building systems and community and systems of healing, different than anything the world has seen before because of the inspiration of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. So that's it.
Thank you so much for your talk, Ms. Sutton. I really enjoyed it. It moved me. I think a lot of everyone else also did. So yeah, and now we can have time for questions. So if you have a question, you can put it in the chat and I will read it out. And our first question asks, what is your opinion about the Chinese in Africa? Also, what is your opinion about the anti-Asian attacks in the USA? What insight would you give about this?
The Chinese in Africa?
That's what it said. I don't know what that.
I'm not sure what that means. I mean, the interesting thing about the anti-Asian attacks, I mean, this is part of our deeply ingrained racial prejudice of the United States. We're a mess. We're a big old mess, and that's part of it. That's a symptom of our sickness, unfortunately. But what I would add to that is one of the things that was left out of that mass murder in the massage parlors in Atlanta was that was some serious sexism stuff going on, and I have no idea why nobody was talking about that. Of course, it was anti-Asian, but frankly, as a woman, more important, it was misogynist. It was not looking at the relationships between men and women and seeing. Yeah, it was just bizarre to me that nobody was talking about that. It was totally bizarre. Okay, perhaps the question has to do with the Chinese government establishing serious trade operations in Africa. Well, I live in Paris a chunk of the year because my husband is Parisian, and the apparently almost all the cafes are owned by China. They were, so it's, China's enormous, and I don't have a specific idea about that, partly because I don't know enough to say anything intelligent about it. And I got enough to deal with here in my wonderful, messed up country of the United States that I actually get to be out of sometimes. But yeah, so I'm not sure what you mean. And maybe some of the other Baha'is might know more about that issue and have more deep thoughts about it.
Thank you.
I would love to ask you guys a question, because I just want to know, I gave a list of things that I sort of did a little research about this year and that were kind of new to me in terms of their details. And I wanted to know if any of you have things that you've learned about that were kind of eye-opening for you. Yeah, right. And the interesting thing about white fragility, because it's kind of controversial, because there's a ton of Black people that are like, we've been saying this stuff forever. Why does it take a white person to say it and then everybody suddenly understands it and listens to it? Yeah, the 13th. Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah, watching the 13th is great. It's a great primer in the American justice system and how it was structured. My father was a civil rights attorney, and he used to talk about all of this stuff as certain laws were being passed and all these things. And I thought, why does he get so upset? Why is he yelling at the TV? What is his problem? Why is he so upset? And I'm like, oh, I now know why he was so upset. I mean, he really was he barely could function with the anger that he felt. I will talk about the LA group. I have developed a 12-hour course for seniors on racism and learned so much in gathering the info for it. Oh, how wonderful. A 12-hour course for seniors. Wow. To me, it's I think one of the things that I've become really passionate about is clarifying the things that facts that are not in dispute, stuff that nobody's fighting over, because it's just, that's what it is. And educating one another about those kinds of things, because I'm kind of optimistic. I feel like people are sincere enough if they really feel something is unfair, if they really absorb that. I think really amazing things can happen. I think it's just a matter of allowing the clouds to not, we don't challenge each other. We don't want to make waves. We just want it to be nice. Okay, let me just see.
Yes, our next question asked, I'd like to find out more about the history of the faith. Where can I go to read about it? Maybe some centralized resource space.
History of the faith. Wow. Well, that's the kind of the thing that's really amazing, is that the history of the faith is so rich, and it's very close to our own time, and so it's not difficult to find. What do you guys think? Write in the chat what you think is the best thing for the history of the faith. I mean, there's the Dawnbreakers and Release the Sun, which is a compressed version of the early history of the faith. What's a really good history? I mean, that might.
Anyone interested can fill out our Google form, and we'll put them in contact with more resources.
There's so much. It's not so hard to find stuff. I'm just trying to think of what's, there's classic Baha'u'llah and the New Era, which is an introductory thing. I think Baha'i.org, isn't there? There's great articles, and I'm sure there's some good stuff, good history resources too. If you're new to the Baha'i Faith, yeah. But Mary Perkins writes a book about the central figures, and her books are very helpful on history. I just started doing a Ruhi book 8 on the Covenant, which is talks about the central figures. In fact, one of those quotes about the radicalism is right at the beginning of book 8 of Shoghi Effendi saying, "This ain't no party, this ain't no disco." He doesn't say it like that, but I'm silly, so I do. We're not here to just dance around and be nice to each other. We're here to transform human relationships. We're here to transform human society. And I think now we're at a point where it's I think most people realize, wow, something really intense has to happen for us to, to do something. As we say in 12-step stuff, half measures avail us nothing. I mean, we're to a point now where we're so far gone. Like, there's got to be something. And what I think I had a thought before that I didn't totally finish, that I became a Baha'i because I wasn't optimistic enough to think that anything other than a revelation of God was going to be strong enough for us to overcome the kind of injustice that I started to see. I was like, oh, people are not going to want to change this. But then when I started to read about the Baha'i revelation and the history, which is tremendously inspiring, I thought, okay, if there's any shot, it's got to be this. If there's any shot here, I think this is the shot. And so I said, okay, I was an atheist, but I'm going in. And so I did. And then I got stuck because I started reading the writings of Baha'u'llah, and I thought, oh man, I totally believe this now. And I'm just one of them, and I believe in God, and I have to justify it. And oh man, and it's really inspiring, and I feel really silly. And my parents taught me better than this, but what are you going to do? What are you going to do?
We have a question that asks, do you think the Black nationalist movement that focuses on self-improvement is detrimental to the unity between Black and white?
No, I think it's a phase. I think it's a step. Shoghi Effendi talks about a nation building needing to be completed before we have world unity. And so part of, I think, what's going on now, which is why I'm in full support of this 100% Black Baha'i conference that's going on, even as we speak, that I got to audit last year. And I was like, okay, this is the coolest conference I've ever been to of any kind. And let them do their thing without our input. Let them find their voice on their terms, and then have them come to the party without our nonsense messing it up. And so that we can come together as equal people with equal voices. So I think that a lot of these things, they're moments that we have to go through in order to create an equilibrium in society. So yes, ultimately we are all one and all the rest of it. But I think it's very important for those of us who have been in groups who have had nice loud voices for a really long time and all the money, to be able to overcome our impatience and to show our humility, and to understand that in order for this to work, we're going to have to learn to step back a little bit. And this is just part of the development and creation of balance. And that doesn't just go for Black folks. It goes for Asians and Native American peoples, and all the people whose voices have not been heard. We will, start to have that strength of voice. But think about it. It's like if you've always been the minority, and you've always done things according to the cultural terms of the majority, it takes a minute to step in your feet and say, okay, so what's our way of doing this? What can we offer to the world? And of course, a lot of that already exists. I mean, I'm a jazz musician, so my whole world is basically Podi-centered. It's, all of my heroes, all the creators of the music that I strive to do were African American. So, my community pretty much understands this concept, and there's not a lot of controversy about it. But in so many other areas, there is. And so I think it's just a part of balance. I don't think it's a bad thing.
Thank you. Our next question asks, can you share your thoughts on the Guardian's exhortation to people of African descent in the U.S. to exhibit their readiness to forget the past?
I just got to make it as easy for them as possible. To me, the interesting thing about the writings of the Guardian is, because of the way that he writes it, I feel like it's inappropriate for me to talk about what he says to them, because he didn't say it to me. It's not my job to police them. It's my job to police me. And it's clear that he wrote our exhortation first. And then he says, through a corresponding effort on their part, that they should show a willingness to forget the past. Is that, no, are they willing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Our next question asks, how should the Guardian's guidance be understood in the context of today's discourse on race?
You know, I wish that I could. It seems ridiculous that even though this was written in 1938, that it's as relevant as it is, but it still rings so true. You know, it still rings so true because we didn't totally do it. And in the Sunday group, somebody said, "Tell me about the Sunday group." The Sunday group is a, you know, we don't even refer to people as white or black. We refer to them as podi or sodi, and sodi is the sclera of the eye, the white that surrounds the, you know, the white that surrounds. Because of these writings of Abdul Baha, wrote several of them. And, you know, we just noticed that there's going to be a monument made to Robert Turner, the first African-American Baha'i in the United States. I was very excited to see that the NSA is going to do that. And in a tablet written by Abdul Baha to Robert Turner, he again uses this metaphor of the pupil of the eye. It's not in just one place, it's in several different places. And I think that, of course, these writings are going to have different implications with, you know, 90 more years of history to look at. But to me, they just cut right to the chase. And it's amazing. And knowing the history of these writings, because Shoghi Effendi had a pilgrimage from Sadie Oglesby, who was a Baha'i of an African-American Baha'i, and she was the first African-American Baha'i to visit the Guardian in like 1920 something or other, 21-ish, I don't know, 27, I think. And she gave a full report on her pilgrimage, and she was there for like 30 days, because in those days they would go over there and they'd hang. They'd be there for a while. And it was so fascinating because every night the other American pilgrims who were white, and they were from the DC area, would want to talk about other things. And the Guardian would stop saying, "That's not what I want to hear about. I want to talk to Mrs. Oglesby about the situation of Negroes," which is what they, you know, was the appropriate and respectful terminology at that moment. "I want to talk about that. I want to talk about whether why there are not more in the Baha'i faith. Are they feeling welcome? What's going on?" And he would not let the white and Persian pilgrims change the subject. He just continued every meal, every time they were together, saying, "No, this is the issue that we have to talk about." And so to have that kind of insight, and being in Europe and seeing the response of the European community, who of course are looking at the United States and are very sensitive to this issue and know what a wound it is. And it's a wound that the whole world can see and that the whole world experiences on some level. And of course, it's a wound that is reflected in wounds, similar wounds all over the world. It's like, you know, it's kind of like the Holocaust is not the only time the Holocaust happened, as we know. You know, our racism is a specifically stinky variety, and we are a specifically large country and a specifically powerful country in the world. But of course, us healing this has implications for the entire world. So we're not just doing this for ourselves. We're doing this for the whole world. And the Sunday space is all about that. And it's just been, for me, it's been like the first real spiritual community I've ever experienced. Because there's nothing like people being honest with each other. There's nothing like people really telling you how they feel and creating space for people that have not been telling you how they felt. And once that transformation takes place, you'll take a bullet for each other. It's just a different kind of reality. And we learn how limited our own cultural tendencies are, you know, how many assumptions we make about things just because we have habits. Can others enter the Sunday space? Yeah, people, anybody can come. We're not having it tomorrow. We canceled it this is the first Sunday we canceled it in over a year because of the Bahá'í conference. And we said, everybody needs to just go to Juneteenth stuff and, have a nice Father's Day. But there's also this amazing thing. There's a website, worldembracing.net, which has there's all sorts of initiatives that were started by Black Baha'is. Essentially, there was a prayer call that went on for 11 years in the morning, where folks would just get together and pray together from all over the country, and they studied Sadie Oglesby and her history, and they just basically took the bull by the horns and did all this research about the history of Blacks in the faith in the United States, and understanding these writings on a level that we as a larger community didn't understand them, and then came to us and said, okay, we're here to help you out because you guys need it. And it's just been so phenomenal.
Thank you. Our next question asks, do you think white America has changed since the election of Obama? Do you see a change in white people in recent years?
I think there's a wonderful letter from the Universal House of Justice in June of last year. And in that letter, they said, sadly, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I haven't memorized it, but they say, sadly, the history of your nation shows that when progress is made, often it's undone soon. Basically, that's kind of like this. We're not going in a totally straight linear fashion. So I think, well, and this is where radical virtue comes in. On the one hand, I think, like my son and the younger generations, they have more information. They understand more about institutional racism. They don't get freaked out when you talk about institutional racism and try to say it's not there. However, frankly, I think they've got work to do too, because they just piled on each other, and they're not very patient, and they unfortunately often people that really sincerely want to fight racism do it in such a way that it's a barrier to the people that need that information the most. So my thing is always like, how do we make a dent? How do we really make a dent and connect with people? And unfortunately, it's not an instantaneous process. It's going to be, what is Shoghi Effendi says, it's a long and thorny path beset with pitfalls. That's what he says at the end of those same passages. So this is really hard work. And so in terms of, I think what's happening, the way I see it, because this is a complete, we're moving towards a complete reconstruction of civilized society. And one of my dad's things was, I call it the Bob Sutton law. He says, people will give you anything except some of their money. And so I think as we really start looking at these issues of justice and who got the money and how they got the money and where the money is now and where the money is going tomorrow and where the power is, and we really start absorbing the need to change these systems, I think we'll have more and more pushback on the part of people in power saying, there's not really any problem here, nothing to see here, everything's good, we're nice people, we're a nice country, everything's cool. And it's understandable because it's not fun to get up in the morning and say, wow, how did I get this house? Is this okay that I live in this house? Where did my kids go to school? Is it okay that they went to that school? Who couldn't go to that school? How? Wait a minute. It's pretty intense. And so I think it's there's going to be backlash. There's going to be pushback. But at the same time, I think large numbers of people are thirsty for a new way of looking at this that's actually productive, spiritually based, and truly transformative, rather than just finding somebody to blame, finding the person that's worse than you.
Well,
yeah, to end institutional racism means we have to become uncomfortable. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions today. I think that all these questions show how deeply we're all thinking about the topic. So I'd like to thank you again and thank everyone here. So now I will just introduce our speaker for next week. So our speaker next week is going to be Mr. Kamran Siddiq, and his topic is, should faith be blind or conscious? And again, these talks occur every Saturday at noon Eastern Daylight Time, so please invite your friends and family. And if you're new to the Baha'i Faith, or if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, please fill out the Google form that we will put in the chat below. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Hope to see you all next Saturday. Bye.